There is a question that appears simple until you look closely at what it assumes. Why do some people wake up while others do not? It seems to describe an obvious difference between human beings, because some people begin questioning identity, consciousness, death, purpose, and the nature of reality, while others appear perfectly content to live within the world immediately in front of them. One person may spend decades asking what they are beyond the personality, while another may never feel compelled to ask the question at all. From the outside, these two lives can appear to be moving through entirely different levels of awareness. But before deciding why the difference exists, we have to ask whether we actually know what we are looking at. The difficulty begins with the word awakening itself. We often use it as though it names a single event recognizable across different people. But human development rarely behaves so cleanly. For one person, awakening may mean realizing that the personality is not the whole of identity. For another, it may mean becoming incapable of continuing a destructive family pattern. For another, it may arrive as an ethical sensitivity that never acquires spiritual language at all. Someone may experience visions, synchronicities, altered states, or profound metaphysical insight and call that awakening, while another person quietly becomes more truthful, more compassionate, and less governed by fear without ever describing themselves as awakened. If we cannot agree on what awakening is, certainty about who has or has not experienced it becomes much harder to defend. This matters because spiritual language can make invisible development look absent. Imagine someone who never discusses consciousness, never reads mystical literature, never meditates, and has no interest in metaphysical questions. They may appear completely asleep to someone whose life has become organized around those subjects. Yet that same person may have spent 40 years learning how not to repeat the cruelty they inherited, how to remain present with another person's suffering without needing to escape it, or how to love without ownership. Nothing about that process requires them to develop a theory of the soul. If consciousness can deepen through experience as well as explanation, then our usual measurements may be detecting vocabulary more easily than development. The opposite possibility is equally uncomfortable. A person can possess an enormous spiritual vocabulary while remaining governed by motives they do not recognize. They can understand reincarnation, multidimensional consciousness, energy, non-duality, manifestation, or the architecture of reality and still be unable to tolerate disagreement without feeling threatened. They can describe the dissolution of ego while arranging their entire identity around being someone who has dissolved the ego. They can recognize manipulation everywhere except in themselves, perceive unconsciousness in everyone around them, and become increasingly certain that their perception proves their advancement. Knowledge may transform consciousness, but knowledge can also become another structure through which the personality protects itself. This is why external behavior gives us less access to another person's interior development than we often imagine. We see fragments: what they say, what they value publicly, what interests them, how they react in situations we happen to witness. We do not see the entire movement taking place beneath those expressions. Someone may be wrestling with questions they have never spoken aloud, while someone who speaks constantly about awakening may be repeating conclusions they adopted years ago and no longer examine. The human interior is not transparent simply because people share language with us. Much of what consciousness is doing cannot be measured from the outside. There is another layer beneath this, and it involves timing. Human beings often assume that if something is valuable, recognizing it earlier must be better than recognizing it later. We apply the logic of achievement to consciousness. Awakening at 20 seems more advanced than awakening at 60, and awakening at all appears preferable to never awakening during a particular lifetime. But many forms of human understanding do not arrive merely because information becomes available. A sentence can be heard 10 years before a person actually has the experience necessary to understand what the sentence means. The information did not change. The consciousness encountering it did. You have probably experienced this without calling it awakening. Someone once told you something that sounded ordinary, irritating, naive, or simply irrelevant, and years later life placed you inside the exact conditions that made the same word suddenly become visible. You did not become more intelligent in that instant. Something in experience created a relationship to the meaning that had not existed before. This is why trying to force insight into another person can feel like pushing on a locked door whose lock is not intellectual. Sometimes there is no argument capable of replacing an experience that has not yet occurred. That does not mean every realization is predetermined to arrive on schedule. Timing is not the same as destiny, and readiness is not a hidden appointment written somewhere beyond the personality. A person can encounter an opening and move toward it, resist it, misunderstand it, postpone it, or use it to reinforce the structure being challenged. Human choice participates in development even when choice itself is conditioned by history, temperament, fear, biology, relationship, and circumstance. We are neither completely free nor completely mechanical. Awakening, whatever else it may be, appears to emerge within that tension. Consider what happens when a person's existing identity is required for survival. A child growing up in an instability may learn to remain intensely attentive to external conditions because their nervous system has good reason to prioritize what is happening immediately around them. That adaptation can remain long after the original danger disappears. Asking such a person to loosen their identification with control, certainty, or vigilance may not feel liberating at first. It may feel like asking them to surrender the very structure that once kept them safe. The mind does not always resist expanded awareness because it is stubborn or spiritually immature. Sometimes it resists because expansion is being interpreted by the body as danger. This introduces a dimension that spiritual explanations sometimes neglect. Consciousness is being expressed through biology. Whatever we believe about the soul, the person living a human life is encountering that life through a brain, nervous system, hormonal environment, sensory system, developmental history, and physical body. Exhaustion changes perception. Trauma changes attention. Chronic uncertainty changes what the organism considers important enough to notice. A person struggling to keep housing, protect children, care for an aging parent, survive illness, or escape violence may not have the same cognitive and emotional space available for sustained metaphysical inquiry as someone whose life provides safety and time. That does not make one life less conscious than another. It means consciousness under pressure may organize itself around different demands. The mother working 2 jobs who never asks whether the universe is multidimensional may nevertheless be practicing sacrifice, endurance, tenderness, restraint, grief, responsibility, and love at intensities that profoundly alter her. The person spending 3 hours each morning in contemplative practice may develop another range of perception entirely. It would be strange to assume that only the development we recognize as spiritual counts as development. Life may be teaching through conditions that do not resemble the classroom we prefer. There is also temperament. Some people are naturally drawn toward abstraction, mystery, symbolic thought, philosophy, altered states, and questions that cannot be resolved by ordinary measurement. Others are drawn toward physical construction, social organization, caregiving, technical precision, relationship, craft, movement, or tangible problem solving. We do not assume that everyone who lacks musical obsession has failed to awaken to music, because we understand that human beings distribute attention differently. Yet when the subject becomes spirituality, difference in orientation is often converted into hierarchy. We begin treating one kind of curiosity as evidence that consciousness itself is more developed. Perhaps that temptation arises because awakening can feel so consequential from the inside. When your understanding of reality changes, it can become difficult to remember what the world felt like before that change. Questions that now appear unavoidable once seemed unnecessary to you too, and truths that now feel obvious may once have sounded implausible or absurd. The transformation is so intimate that the mind naturally imagines everyone would benefit from seeing what it sees, But the intensity of a realization does not automatically make it the immediate developmental requirement of every other person. What changed your life may genuinely have changed your life without becoming the universal measurement of everyone else's. This distinction becomes more important when we introduce the possibility of incarnation. If consciousness participates in more than one lifetime, then the assumption that every life exists for the same developmental purpose becomes difficult to sustain. One incarnation might emphasize self-recognition, another relationship, another limitation, another responsibility, another encounter with power, another with helplessness, another with embodiment itself. Even this language must be held carefully, because we do not possess a complete map showing us why any individual consciousness has entered any particular life. The concept of incarnation can widen humility, but it can just as easily become a way of pretending we know what another person's life is for. The danger appears whenever mystery becomes explanation too quickly. We see someone who never questions conventional reality and say they did not come here to awaken. We see someone suffering and say their soul chose the experience. We see someone cruel and imagine they must be at a lower stage of development. These statements may sound metaphysically sophisticated while functioning exactly like ordinary judgment. They give us a story that removes uncertainty. The story may even contain some truth, but possessing a possible explanation is not the same as possessing knowledge of a particular person's interior design. If incarnation involves different conditions, then forgetting may itself have a role that cannot be dismissed as failure. A life lived without conscious access to a larger identity could create experiences that would be impossible if that larger identity remained continuously available. Fear would mean something different if you knew with certainty that death was temporary. Attachment would mean something different if you remembered every relationship extending beyond one lifetime. Choice would feel different if the consequences of every path were visible before you entered it. The opacity of human life may not merely obstruct consciousness. It may help produce forms of experience that transparency cannot produce. But even here, we should resist making the explanation too comfortable. Saying that forgetting has purpose can become a way of romanticizing confusion, suffering, or ignorance. Not every limitation needs to be praised simply because it exists. Consciousness can become trapped in destructive patterns, and human beings can cause enormous harm while defending the narrow structures through which they interpret reality. There are forms of awareness that genuinely reduce unnecessary suffering, increase responsibility, and expand what a person is capable of receiving. The question is not whether awakening matters, but whether its value permits us to assume that everyone must encounter it in the same form and within the same visible timetable. This is where the original question begins changing shape. Why do some souls wake up and others do not? Sounds as though we are observing two stable categories, awakened people and unawakened people. But where exactly would we draw the boundary? Is someone awakened when they first suspect reality is larger than they were taught, when they directly experience that larger reality, when their behavior changes because of it, or when the insight survives pressure and becomes embodied? A dramatic realization may happen in a single night, while the restructuring required to live from that realization may take decades. Many people know this gap personally. You can see a pattern clearly and still repeat it. You can understand that control is exhausting and still tighten your grip when uncertainty enters the room. You can recognize that another person's disagreement does not threaten your identity and still feel your body preparing for battle before your mind catches up. If awakening means seeing, then seeing does not necessarily mean becoming. And if awakening means becoming, then almost everyone who claims the word must admit that the process remains incomplete. This is one reason spiritual hierarchy is so seductive. It transforms an unfinished process into a stable identity. Instead of saying, I have become aware of something I did not previously see, the personality begins saying, I am awake. The first statement remains open because it describes an event within consciousness. The second can become a social position from which other people are evaluated. Once that identity hardens, disagreement can be interpreted as evidence of another person's unconsciousness rather than as information worth examining. A path intended to loosen identity can quietly manufacture a new identity that is even harder to question because it believes questioning has already been completed. There is a subtle emotional reward inside this distinction. If I am awake and another person is not, then my struggle acquires significance and my difference acquires status. The loneliness of not being understood can be converted into evidence that I have advanced beyond those who do not understand me. Sometimes that interpretation may protect a real insight from social pressure, because human groups absolutely can reject unfamiliar perception. But sometimes it also protects the person from asking whether they have become attached to being exceptional. The question, why haven't they awakened, can therefore reveal as much about the one asking as the one being observed. This does not require us to collapse every distinction and pretend all states of consciousness are identical. They are not. A person capable of observing their own reactions has access to choices that are unavailable while those actions remain completely unconscious. Someone who recognizes how fear distorts perception can respond differently from someone who experiences every fearful interpretation as objective reality. Awareness creates capacity, but capacity in one dimension does not automatically establish superiority across the whole person. A spiritually perceptive person may still be emotionally avoidant. A highly compassionate person may hold almost no metaphysical curiosity. A brilliant philosopher may treat their family terribly, while someone who has never considered the nature of consciousness may become the safest person everyone around them knows. Human development is uneven because the human being is multidimensional, even before we introduce anything beyond the human. We mature in different capacities at different rates. An unusual strength in one area can hide extraordinary immaturity in another. Any serious account of awakening has to survive contact with that complexity. Perhaps then what we call awakening is less like crossing a border and more like becoming available to realities that were previously filtered out. Those realities may concern identity, relationship, responsibility, mortality, interconnectedness, perception, or the hidden motives shaping our behavior. Different people become available to different truths under different conditions, and those openings can widen, contract, stabilize, or disappear. A person may become profoundly awake to one dimension of existence while remaining nearly unreachable in another. Once this is recognized, the question is no longer merely why some souls wake up and others do not, but why consciousness opens where it does, when it does, and toward what. And that question does not give us the comfort of a ranking system. It asks us to hold biology without reducing consciousness to biology, choice without pretending choice is unconstrained, incarnation without pretending we know another soul's design, and development without mistaking our preferred form of development for the whole. It also leaves us with a more intimate uncertainty. Perhaps the people we have categorized as asleep are participating in realities we have not learned to value, while the places where we consider ourselves awake still contain structures we cannot yet see. The mystery may not be why awakening has been distributed so unevenly among human beings. The deeper mystery may be why we expected consciousness to reveal itself uniformly in the first place. But even the idea that consciousness simply opens in different ways may be too comfortable. It allows us to preserve the assumption that everyone is developing, everyone is moving, everyone is receiving exactly the kind of lesson appropriate to them, only through different forms. That interpretation sounds generous because it avoids ranking people by spiritual vocabulary, yet it can become another way of protecting ourselves from a harder possibility. Some lives may contain long periods in which very little visible development occurs. Some people may repeatedly refuse openings available to them, and some patterns may genuinely become more rigid rather than more conscious. Difference does not automatically mean hidden progress. This matters because compassion can become sentimental when it refuses to distinguish between complexity and avoidance. A person who has spent 30 years repeating the same destructive reaction may indeed be learning something we cannot see, but they may also be repeating the same destructive reaction. We do not honor consciousness by pretending every pattern is secretly advancement. Sometimes awareness is resisted because awareness threatens something the personality does not want to lose. Sometimes the cost of remaining unchanged is simply being paid by other people. That introduces a less comforting dimension of choice. It is true that biology, history, trauma, circumstance, culture, and nervous system capacity constrain what a person can perceive and tolerate. But constraint does not erase agency completely. And explaining a pattern is not the same as removing responsibility for it. Two people can emerge from similar conditions and respond differently, not because one possesses a superior soul, but because human choice remains active inside conditions that never fully determine it. If awakening involves becoming available to what was previously unseen, then refusal must remain one possible response to that availability. You know this in smaller ways because you have watched yourself avoid things you already understood. There are moments when you do not need more information because the information is not the obstacle. You know the conversation you need to have, the habit you need to stop protecting, the apology you need to make, the boundary you need to establish, or the belief that has already stopped being true. Yet knowing does not immediately produce movement because part of you is still receiving something from staying where you are. Awareness can knock on a door that the personality has practical reasons for keeping closed. Those reasons are rarely simple. A belief may protect belonging, because changing your mind could create distance from family or community. An identity may protect dignity, because admitting error could collapse a story you have depended upon for years. A grievance may protect innocence, because releasing it might require acknowledging your own participation in what happened. Even suffering can become structurally familiar enough that the unknown feels more threatening than the pain already understood. Under those conditions, awakening is not merely the arrival of truth. It is a negotiation with everything organized around not needing that truth. So one reason people appear to awaken differently may be that insight carries different costs. What looks obvious from outside another person's life may threaten relationships, livelihood, faith, social identity, memory, status, or psychological stability from within it. We often imagine awakening as expansion, but expansion can initially feel like demolition. A larger identity may destabilize a smaller one before any new coherence forms. The person resisting that movement may not be incapable of seeing, they may understand enough to sense what seeing would require. This is why awakening cannot be reduced to receptivity alone. Receptivity sounds passive, as though consciousness simply becomes ready and truth enters. But many forms of awakening require participation after perception, choosing differently, tolerating disorientation, relinquishing familiar rewards, and continuing to examine what would be easier to leave unquestioned. A revelation can happen without consent, while integration rarely does. What follows the opening may tell us more than the opening itself. Yet this creates another problem. If we emphasize choice too strongly, we easily return to the hierarchy we were trying to escape. The awakened become courageous, and the unawakened become resistant, lazy, frightened, or unwilling. That explanation flatters the people who already identify with awakening because it quietly converts their experience into evidence of superior character. But no one chooses from a neutral starting point, and no one can calculate how much interior pressure another person is carrying. Agency is real without being equally available in every moment. A nervous system can narrow the field of possibility long before conscious deliberation begins. A person living in persistent threat may genuinely have fewer accessible responses than someone whose body expects safety. Depression, grief, exhaustion, chronic stress, developmental injury, and social instability can alter attention before philosophy ever enters the room. Even curiosity depends partly on surplus capacity, enough safety to let the mind wander beyond immediate demands. We should therefore be careful whenever we turn a person's visible lack of inquiry into a moral explanation. But biology does not settle the question either, because some people awaken precisely through pressure that appears as though it should have made such inquiry impossible. There are individuals whose entire understanding of reality begins changing in the middle of illness, bereavement, poverty, catastrophe, imprisonment, or collapse. Their circumstances do not provide spaciousness, they remove it. What narrows one person's world can rupture another person's assumptions so completely that a wider field becomes visible. The same category of experience can therefore produce opposite movements in different people. This suggests that circumstances do not cause awakening in any simple way. Suffering is not inherently awakening, because suffering can deepen fear, resentment, fragmentation, and rigidity just as easily as it can produce compassion or insight. Safety is not inherently awakening either, because comfort can create room for contemplation or simply allow familiar patterns to continue without interruption. Education can expose a person to new ideas while also making them more skilled at defending old ones. Even spiritual practice can dissolve identity or become one of identity's most sophisticated defenses. There is no reliable external ingredient from which awakening can be predicted. The same teacher can liberate one student, annoy another, and encourage dependency in a third. The same book can reorganize someone's life and leave another person completely unmoved. A mystical experience can humble one person and inflate another. If the event alone determined development, identical exposures would produce more consistent results than they do. So perhaps the decisive variable lies somewhere deeper in the relationship between experience and interpretation. Human beings do not merely encounter events, they organize those events into meaning. Two people can survive the same crisis and emerge carrying completely different conclusions about reality. One may become more open because uncertainty revealed the limits of control, while another may become more controlling because uncertainty revealed how vulnerable they felt. Experience provides pressure, but interpretation helps determine what the pressure becomes. Even that is not enough, because interpretation is itself shaped by a previous experience. What you conclude today is influenced by what happened yesterday, what you were taught as a child, what your body expects from other people, what your culture rewards, and what identities you have learned to defend. Meaning is not created from nowhere. It arrives through a structure that has already been forming for years. Awakening may therefore involve not only seeing something new, but acquiring enough distance from the structure doing the seeing to recognize that interpretation itself is participating in reality. This can become deeply unsettling because it means certainty is not automatically evidence of clarity. Some of the strongest convictions a person possesses may be strengthened precisely because they protect the structure through which experience is being interpreted. Spiritual certainty is not exempt. A person can become completely convinced that they understand why other souls incarnate, why suffering occurs, what level of consciousness someone occupies, or what the universe intends. And that conviction may feel identical from the inside to genuine recognition. Intensity cannot reliably distinguish revelation from defense. Here, the questioning of awakening turns back on the person asking it. If you believe you are awake, what would allow you to discover that some part of your awakening is interpretation rather than perception? What evidence could you receive without immediately translating it through the worldview you already trust? Every coherent system has the ability to explain confirming experiences, but a mature system must also survive experiences that do not fit. Otherwise, the worldview becomes unfalsifiable inside the consciousness holding it. This does not mean all spiritual understanding is fantasy or that every metaphysical insight should be reduced to psychology. It means the possession of a larger framework does not remove the ordinary human problem of self-deception. In fact, larger frameworks can create more elaborate forms of self-deception because they provide more language with which to interpret everything that happens. Coincidence becomes confirmation. Resistance becomes proof, disagreement becomes unconsciousness, suffering becomes design, and uncertainty disappears beneath explanation. A worldview can become so complete that reality loses the ability to surprise it. And if reality can no longer surprise you, something essential may have stopped moving. Awakening is often described as knowing more, but perhaps one sign of genuine expansion is becoming capable of not knowing without immediately filling the space. The person who once needed certainty about death may become able to live meaningfully while admitting what cannot yet be demonstrated. The person who once needed to classify everyone as awake or asleep may begin noticing how unstable those categories are. Increased awareness may therefore produce greater precision in some areas and greater humility in others. This brings us to another destabilization. Perhaps awakening is not always a movement toward broader metaphysical recognition. There are people who become less interested in metaphysical explanation as they mature, not because they have regressed, but because their attention becomes increasingly grounded in direct relationship, conduct, and responsibility. Someone may spend years searching for cosmic architecture and eventually discover that the question changing their life is whether they can remain kind when no one rewards them for it. Another may move from fascination with identity beyond the body toward a deeper willingness to inhabit the body they actually have. Expansion sometimes looks less like leaving the ordinary world and more like becoming impossible to remove from it. This challenges a common image of awakening as ascent. If development always moves upward, outward, and beyond, then ordinary life becomes a lower platform to transcend. But consciousness may also deepen by descending into specificity. This relationship, this grief, this body, this promise, this consequence, this moment that cannot be replaced by theory. A person can know extraordinary things about consciousness while remaining unable to stay present during an ordinary conflict. Another may know almost nothing about cosmology and possess a remarkable capacity to remain present when another human being is frightened, ashamed, or dying. Which of them is more awake? The question begins to break under the weight placed upon it. Awareness in one domain cannot be converted cleanly into total developmental rank. A person can be perceptually expanded and relationally immature, intellectually brilliant and emotionally defended, ethically sensitive and metaphysically uninterested, mystical and irresponsible, practical and profoundly compassionate. Human consciousness does not appear to develop along one ladder because the capacities composing a human life do not move as one unit. This does not mean there are no longer patterns. It means the pattern may resemble a landscape more than a staircase. Different capacities can strengthen, weaken, remain dormant, conflict, or reorganize one another. A major spiritual opening might increase sensitivity while temporarily reducing stability, or dissolve one identity while causing another identity to form around the experience. Growth can therefore make a person more developed in one sense while making their unresolved material more visible in another. Anyone who has undergone significant interchange recognizes this paradox. You may become more aware of your fear and initially feel more fearful because what was previously automatic is now impossible to ignore. You may become more compassionate and simultaneously more aware of the places where compassion ends. You may feel less certain after years of inquiry than you felt at the beginning because the questions have become larger rather than smaller. Development does not always feel like accumulating clarity. Sometimes it feels like losing explanations that once made the world manageable. If this is true, then the person who appears not to be awakening may be difficult to assess, not only because their development is hidden, but because our image of what development should look like may itself be incomplete. We may expect increased spirituality where life is producing increased honesty. We may expect metaphysical curiosity where development is occurring through responsibility. We may expect transcendence where the central movement is embodiment. And we may expect visible change where the most consequential change is a private decision repeated quietly for years. Still, we should not turn that possibility into another comforting universal. Some people may indeed move through an entire lifetime without significantly questioning the structures that govern them. Some may become more defended with age. Some may encounter repeated opportunities to see and repeatedly choose interpretations that preserve what is familiar. There is no need to condemn those lives in order to acknowledge that development is not guaranteed merely because time passes. That may be one of the hardest possibilities for spiritual thought to tolerate. We often want existence to be arranged so perfectly that every failure is secretly progress, every delay is perfectly timed, and every life unfolds exactly as intended. Such a universe protects us from tragedy because nothing can truly be missed. But a world containing meaningful choice may also contain meaningful refusal, unrealized possibilities, squandered openings, and consequences that were not required in advance. Freedom loses much of its meaning if every path inevitably produces the same development. Yet even this cannot be resolved cleanly, because what appears squandered from within one lifetime may look different across a larger arc of consciousness. If continuity extends beyond a single incarnation, then an unfinished movement may not be a final failure. A person may leave a life with questions unopened, relationships unresolved, capacities unused, and consequences still moving through others. Continuity could preserve those tensions without turning them into punishment. But continuity is not the same as saying nothing was lost. Something can matter precisely because it could have happened differently. A conversation not held can alter a family for decades. A fear never confronted can shape children who inherit its consequences without knowing its origin. An act of courage can change the possibilities available to people who come later, just as an act of cruelty can narrow them. If consciousness participates in a larger field, then awakening may never be merely private because what one person sees or refuses to see becomes part of the conditions encountered by others. This changes the ethical weight of the question. Why do some souls wake up and others do not can no longer remain a curiosity about metaphysical distribution. It touches responsibility because awareness changes what becomes possible through a person. Once you see a pattern clearly enough to choose differently, continuing it is not identical to continuing it before you could see it. Increased awareness does not make you superior, but it may make you more accountable. And perhaps that is why awakening becomes distorted when treated as status. Status asks what awareness proves about you. Responsibility asks what awareness now requires from you. The first turns consciousness inward toward identity. The second turns it outward toward consequence. If you know more and become less patient, less honest, less teachable, and more certain of your superiority, then whatever expanded in perception has not yet expanded through the whole life. The question may therefore need to become more demanding than the one we started with. Not merely, why have some awakened while others have not, but what are we calling awakening? What does it cost? What can obstruct it? What does it actually change? And what responsibilities follow once something has genuinely been seen? We may discover that people awaken unevenly because consciousness itself develops unevenly, because choice remains real, because conditions matter without determining everything, and because insight can be accepted, resisted, distorted, embodied, or converted into identity. None of these explanations is sufficient alone, and there is still one more discomfort beneath them. We have been speaking as though awakening belongs primarily to the individual, as though a person wakes up inside a reality that remains otherwise unchanged. But human beings are formed through relationships, cultures, families, languages, institutions, inherited stories, and collective fears long before they become capable of evaluating those structures. Perhaps some forms of sleep do not belong to a person alone, and some forms of awakening cannot be completed by a person alone either. The question may eventually require us to look beyond who is awake and ask what kinds of worlds make certain forms of awareness easier to perceive, harder to sustain, or dangerous to express. If that is so, the mystery becomes larger again. A person can awaken beyond one illusion while remaining completely embedded in another that is shared by everyone around them. A community can normalize cruelty so thoroughly that kindness appears irrational, or normalize competition so thoroughly that cooperation appears naive. A spiritual culture can normalize grandiosity so thoroughly that humility appears like insufficient conviction. What an individual is capable of seeing may therefore depend partly on what the surrounding field permits them to question. This means no one stands entirely outside the sleep they diagnose in others. You may see through a belief that another person cannot see through, while both of you remain inside a larger assumption neither has noticed. The person you call unawakened may be carrying a truth about relationship, embodiment, culture, or responsibility that your own framework has trained you to overlook. Awareness does not remove perspective. It gives perspective more room to recognize itself. And perhaps the deepest awakening is not finally possessing the correct map, but becoming increasingly difficult for any map, including the one you love most, to imprison.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.